Get more confidence. Get that promotion. Get moving up the corporate ladder. Get a better gig with an MBA from Mays Business School at Texas A&M University. Whether you're starting out or stepping up, now you can take your career to a whole new level with a full-time MBA in College Station and convenient weekend options at Houston City Center. Texas A&M has a program to suit your schedule. Visit mba.tamu.edu. And Giga Maggie.
Howdy, welcome to Mays MasterCast. I'm Shannon Deere, the Assistant Dean for Graduate Programs, here with your wonderful host, Ben Wiggins.
Hey, Shannon.
Hi, Ben.
Did you have a nice weekend?
I did. I taught all weekend remotely, so it was good. Worked on some business stuff. It was a good weekend. How about you?
I had a nice weekend. I've been having some sleep troubles lately, which is interesting because my wife is just now getting her sleep troubles resolved. So she's passed them along to me, which is amazing because through all of this, Brielle has slept like a champ, at least at night. She's been having some struggles with nap times recently, but
you're having newborn sleep regression. I
am myself having newborn sleep regression. So don't know what's going on, but it is a beautiful day in Aggie land today. After a hot weekend, it is 70 degrees outside right now.
And it is gorgeous.
So, yeah,
all weekend it was nice in the mornings and at night. It got warm during the day.
Yeah, sure did.
But warm in the 80s, which I liked. Yeah, I'm sure it did. You definitely were not outside.
Me? I went for a run yesterday. I'm pleased to announce.
Ooh. Are you pleased with yourself?
I'm very pleased with myself. I usually go outside long enough to work out while we're doing workouts from home, but and then I go back inside. But I also took Brielle for a walk, so I was outside twice yesterday.
Your beautiful skin may not be able to handle that.
I'm not staying inside to preserve my skin, Shannon.
I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Yeah. Calm down.
No, I don't. I guess I don't know if I have good skin. Do I have good? Maybe I do. I don't know.
You have good skin, and it's very sun-kissed. I worry about you in the sun.
Yeah, I worry about me in the sun too. When I do go out, when I went for that run yesterday, I definitely put on sunscreen first because I'm a pale dude. Cut to Kyle nodding. But it is a beautiful day in Aggie land today. And what should our listeners know about today's guest?
Well, Kyle shaved his beard. They should know that.
Oh, true. Yeah, that's why he jumped on right on time this morning instead of 45 minutes early because he was still busy shaving.
That's right. He's never been that late before. On our show today, we have Dr. Mike Mark. He is a veterinarian. He is currently a committee member of the Texas Veterinary Medical Association and specifically part of the Business Alliance. He's a managing partner of Mark Ross Sloat. He has some really impressive credentials and backgrounds, serving on several advisory boards, city committees, real estate development partnerships, and major corporations. He also co-founded and developed the largest privately held veterinary company in the country, and he was really influential in PetSmart adopting Banfield and their in-house veterinarian hospitals. I really enjoyed the show with Dr. Mark. He was funny and insightful, vulnerable, just really an interesting guy. His son, Ronnie, actually listened to the show, and Ronnie's daughter is in Mays Business School. And Ronnie, we appreciate him listening to the show and recommending his dad as a guest.
Let's get into it. We welcome Dr. Mike Mark to the show. Mike, how's it going?
Oh, everything's great. I'm happy to be up in the morning, right, talking to a bunch of my Aggie buddies, and I just really appreciate you allowing me this opportunity.
We definitely appreciate you being here. How was your weekend?
I don't know, right? Since every day seems to be the same, sort of like that Groundhog movie, you know? I mean, there is no distinction between Monday and Saturday and Sunday, so. Right. Fortunately, all of my days have been really, really good. And I guess that makes my weekend a good weekend, too.
What is your favorite superpower?
Oh, but that, right, we didn't deal with superpowers, right? Back then we had Superman and he was our idol and that was it. And he was pretty minor compared to superpowers. But I often tell my clients that I would trade all my education, experience, and technology for a crystal ball. But I understand that all the crystal balls have already been taken. So I recall reading a book several years ago that was titled Fantastic Voyage.
Okay.
And right, it was about a miniaturized submarine that was injected into a patient's vein. It could have even been the president of the United States. It was somebody that was so important they had to figure out how to save this person.
Okay.
It may have had to do with having the passcode to the nuclear weapons at that time. I don't know. But anyway, this miniaturized submarine was injected into a patient's vein and traveled throughout the body and eventually found the brain clot in his brain, was able to clear that and save the patient. So I'd take that as an alternative, but only if the crystal balls remain unavailable.
Have you ever read Lord of the Rings?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I just watched for the first time one of the episodes of Lord of the Rings, and I had never envisioned getting fascinated by it. Right, but I got fascinated by it. We recorded the second episode the other night. Haven't watched it yet. No, I did not read it.
It's the movies are great too. This is one of the few cases where I would say the movies maybe almost worked out better than the books, and the books are great. My dad read them to us when we were kids. But I'll be interested to hear at some point in the future your take on the blessing and the curse of having a crystal ball, because you keep going in Lord of the Rings and you'll know what I mean.
I only want the blessing part.
Fair enough. Give us 60 seconds on your career journey.
Boy, that's the toughest 60 seconds. I sat there and thought about this question for a long time. I grew up in Bay City, Texas. I was predestined to be a veterinarian, an Aggie, a proud American, and enamored with anything that flies. Boy Scouts were a big part of my career journey. They taught me leadership and life skills that stay with me to this day. I am still an assistant scoutmaster. I had several jobs from the time I was 10 years old. I enjoy work, never considered myself working. I always just get up in the morning and go have a good time. Spent 6 years at A&M, 2 years at Baylor University College of Medicine on a postdoctoral fellowship. And I joined my father, who was a veterinarian, in a small animal practice. And from there, got into my own businesses of veterinary medicine and other things.
How many in your family did you say?
Well, it depended upon the day, the hour, the economic situation. We had a core family of my mother, my father, myself, and a younger brother who's 4 years younger, class of 69.
Yes, sir.
But we were sort of the go-to family, right? We had a house, right? And during that time, most people didn't have houses. Most people lived in rented or leased properties or apartments. And so, we had the stability of at least having a house. So every time someone would get sick, we didn't have hospices back then, but they would come, since my father was a veterinarian, they would come and live with us. And frequently, if there were layoffs in the retail business, some good friends would move in with us. My best friend lived with us part of the time, and he and I ended up going to veterinary school together, and this marks our 70th year as being best friends. So anywhere between 4 and 9.
What was that like? You said that you guys functioned as a de facto hospice, and that also you would have other people come and stay with you, including friends and so forth. How did that as a kid did that feel strange at all, or did that just feel like this is how life is?
Well, it's sort of like people ask us, ask my generation, how did you get along without air conditioning? Well, we didn't know about air conditioning.
True.
Air conditioning might have been a fantasy. We could go to the movie, or oddly enough, in college at A&M wasn't air conditioned. They only had 2 buildings that were air conditioned: the library and the chemistry building were the only two that were air conditioned.
Yeah.
And I think they did that so that we would go to the library and go take chemistry. You know? So I didn't know any better. I just thought that's the way life was.
I remember life before these things.
Oh, well, what was that?
Yeah, exactly. What was your first job?
My first job was a typical first job, right? In the 6th grade, I had a paper route through the newspaper. Oddly enough, I ended up throwing the newspaper in an area that I ended up later living in, which is now a historic district in the city of Houston.
Okay.
Right.
Any funny stories from those days? A lot of first jobs involve some funny stories.
Well, I wasn't exactly really good at collections because collections had to be done late in the evening after people got off of work. And the area, I said it was a historic district. It was. It had a lot of big, old, dark houses. And I go up to the front door, and I don't recall doorbells at all. I'm sure they had them, right? But I recall knocking on the door and a gruff male voice, who is it?
Yep.
And all I could think of was, it's quality control for the Houston Press. Hope you're enjoying your free subscription. Got the heck out of there while I was still alive.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, needless to say, I didn't make a career out of paper.
What was your greatest challenge as a child?
Yeah, if I were to answer the question, I would probably have to say that I couldn't color inside the lines in grade school.
Yeah.
And they had on one side of your report card, they'd have your academic stuff, reading and writing, A, B, C, D. They graded those. On the left-hand side, they had a bunch of boxes and skills. And they graded you either plus or minus. And I never could get a plus in the colors in the lines. I had one teacher explain to me, well, it's because you're left-handed. If you'll start writing with your right hand, you'll be able to do that. Right. And later, right, in life, I gave several lectures on how do you succeed, right? And I realized that not coloring in the lines is one way I succeeded because those weren't my lines. You know, I was coloring inside of my lines, not theirs. And right, if you get sort of brave and you step outside the lines, it's amazing what'll happen.
I love that. Now, what did your parents do, and how did that impact you?
Well, it was impactful in my life, very impactful. My father was a mixed animal veterinary practitioner.
Right. You mentioned that you joined him in practice, was it?
Yeah, much later, right? But there are pictures of me in Bay City. I had a little. He wore coveralls to go work on his large animals out on the ranches and the farms. Yep. And they had a set of matching coveralls made for me. I'm 2 years old, and there's a photograph. We didn't take movies back then, and we rarely took photographs because they were expensive and difficult to take. Okay. But there's a picture of me, right? And there's an old hound dog, big dog, looks like he's about 80 pounds, and he's asleep on the pavement, on the sidewalk. And I walked over to this dog, grabbed his mouth, picked his head up, opened his mouth up, and stuck my head in and looked around. And there was no question what I was going to be. That's what I say. I was born as a veterinarian. I was born as an Aggie. I was born as a proud American, and I'm enamored with anything that flies.
That is great stuff, and I want to talk some more about aviation later.
I
have a question for you. So sure. I've heard that, the phrase, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. And the reason for that is because you're like counting the teeth or whatever. So why is it a bad sign if a horse is missing a tooth?
Well, you're asking me for something that's so far out afield for me that I don't have a clue. I think that the issue was you age horses by their teeth.
Oh.
All right. That's how you tell how old they are.
Fair enough. The veterinary medicine field is facing a lot of challenges these days. most relevant to our audience is the gap in business knowledge for veterinarians who are running their own practice. The practice is a business, but the vets have medical backgrounds and often don't have exposure to business. In corresponding with us, you said there is not a gap between the vet and business. There is an abyss. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think the most significant factor that contributes to the abyss between the veterinarian and business is that most professionals, right, we're very self-reliant. I mean, we stand on our feet all day long and have to depend on our decisions and our decisions only. And in the medical profession, it's even worse, right? And that we take it to the extreme since we deal with life and death and emergencies.
Yeah.
Right? So we have to depend on our own abilities, and right, we rely on our own judgment, but sometimes we don't limit our thinking to relying in our own judgments just in medicine. Right? Veterinarians, along with many other professions, have a tendency to think that we're so self-reliant and so educated that we know more about broadcasting or podcasting than you do. And we can tell you how to do it correctly.
Well, you might be able to in this case, because I don't know anything about podcasting.
Well, that's why I brought up the subject, right? I'd been told that. I was told to get that in somehow, right? So, yeah, and as a for instance, right, and what really triggered me to this is my love of aviation. I read all sorts of books about airplanes and about the mechanics of airplanes, the flying of airplanes, etc. And so what happened was during the 1960s, there was a great spate of deaths in physicians flying private airplanes. And, right, it was known, right, the Beechcraft, the little Bonanza, right, with the V-tail, was called the doctor killer because it was a reasonably priced airplane, and all these physicians would buy these little Bonanzas and fly them, and an inordinate amount of them were getting killed.
Yeah.
And it apparently had to do with them thinking they knew more than the meteorologist, they knew more than the mechanic or the airframe mechanic or the power plant mechanic. And so, right, they'd look out the window to see a bright, clear sky and say, I'm going. And the meteorologist looks out the window, sees a bright, clear sky and says, it's not going to stay that way long.
Right.
But, right, the physician says, well, I know what the hell I'm doing. I'm a physician. Now, the same thing, right, has to do with business, right? You know, that they think that they're so well educated and so smart that they know everything that there is to know about business. The truth of the matter is they're so uneducated about business that they don't know what they don't know. Business is a discipline of itself. I mean, my gosh, you got this great school, right, of business, right? So, right, what happens is they think they can run a business. They don't do a very good job. They frequently will slip off into the abyss. Or, right, even if they don't, the time and energy that they put into trying to run a business gets in the way of them doing the only thing that they really know how to do, and that is to practice medicine and produce income. And so when I speak of an abyss, right, there's this giant gap between what needs to be done and what we know how to do.
Do you think that physicians and veterinarians suffer from some of the same? Let me back up for a second. In sports, there's a phenomenon that I call the culture of belief, and someone else may have named it something different. But we've talked briefly about this on the show before. But elite athletes have been taught from a very early age that you must believe in yourself above all things. And for the best of the best of the best, that turns out to be a blessing for them because they believe that they can do what has been thought to be impossible by many people. And part of the reason that they believe themselves capable is because that believe in yourself has been hammered into them from essentially since diapers. And then it also can, but for these same people, it can also get them in trouble. Athletes mishandling of finances is basically a proverb. And they can often struggle to find success in later life for many of the same reasons, especially the ones who are not such big names that just having their name attached to a project really means something. But, sort of the next tier, players who are really good or athletes who are really good, the culture of belief ends up sometimes being a little bit of a curse later. Do you think that there's some of that same phenomenon at work here?
Well, we used to have a different term for it. We used to call it the God complex.
Oh.
Right? And it may not be politically correct to call it that any longer, but that's pretty much what we looked at. Right? They think that they created the heavens and the earth and they can do anything. And absolutely, it's a curse. You better believe it. To me, right, the analogy that best fits what I'm defining as an abyss is, right, you have an MBA in business, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're well educated in business. I have a DVM, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine.
Yes, sir.
Right. If you had God complex, you would say, I'm going to spay my own dog. Why not? You know how to do everything.
Right.
Right. The truth of the matter is, that's not any different than me saying, I'm going to run a big business, maybe $1 million business, maybe a 7 or 8 or 10 or a $50 million business.
Right.
Because I'm a veterinarian. I know how to run a business. I don't know how to run a business any more than you know how to spay a dog. But that's where the disconnect is.
Right.
Is that so many professional athletes and professionals in business, right, think that we do know more than anybody else.
Right. So then what do we do with this? Should veterinarians be expected to simply just kind of make it work, or is there an alternative model that might lead to greater success?
Well, there's several things I think that we could do. First, right, I'm gonna put it off on our educators. Right, I think we need to add some things to education. I think that we need to not try and make veterinarians into competent business people. How long have you gone to school and studied business? 6 years, 8 years, right? And that's all you've done, okay. Right? In 2-3 hour courses while you're in veterinary school, right? Are you really going to meaningfully change anything as far as making the doctor capable of doing these things? No. What you need to do is you need to explain to the doctor that they don't have a clue about how important and how complex running a big business is. And They need to know 2 things. They need to know, I don't know this, right? But I know where I can find it. Not that I don't know this, but I'll do it myself anyway. Right. That's so counterproductive. It takes them out of producing revenue for the business, and they're not going to do as good a job as finding somebody who really knows what they're doing. There are alternatives, right? But the first thing is that the doctor has to recognize, I need help in this particular part, in the business part. I may be great at running the medical part of the practice, right? But that's not what's going to make me a financial success. And if I don't succeed financially, I cannot continue to do this. So there are some alternatives, right? The alternatives are they now have certified veterinary practice managers.
Oh, okay.
Right, and they are great at taking the load off of all the administrative duties that are necessary in a veterinary hospital. Right. I don't know where all this is. Right. They also we've got certified practice managers. They're not doctors, but they have the training education and experience to handle most of the administrative duties in a veterinary practice.
Right.
And there are also practice management groups where you can join a group that's typically touted as being a purchasing group where you get the purchasing power of 100 clinics instead of one. Right. Well, that's one of the things that they do, but what they do mainly is they provide management and business services, and they provide the professionals that will help you with it. They also provide on-site counseling, right, with the on-site management. And so they bring a lot of business expertise to the table for the veterinarian to access, right? And they're becoming much more common and much more available, right? There are also now venture capital groups. And the venture capital groups, they're available, but most of them are only available to help with business and management if they purchase part of your practice.
Okay.
Right now, veterinary clinics are selling at a multiple of earnings. Before COVID, right, the multiple of earnings was 10 to 12, right? 5 years ago, veterinary clinics sold at a multiple of 5 times earnings. So, right, every venture capital group in the world is trying to get into the veterinary business to accumulate enough practices that they could purchase at 8 to 10 or 12 times earnings, and in 5 years convert this whole group into a sale to a larger company that can pay up to 20 times earnings. And that's precisely what happened with the purchase of VCA by PetSmart or by Mars.
Why do you think the earnings multiples are going up so much recently?
Well, I don't have a real feel for why they are. It may be a lack of performance in other areas of industry. That this, right, the veterinary medicine and pet health care have become really frontline. I mean, that's real glamorous stuff now. 10 years ago, right, the human-animal bond wasn't the same as it is now. And I think that they recognize that the pet industry is gigantic and growing at an unbelievable rate.
You mentioned the acquisition of some large veterinary practices by Mars, the chocolate company, and then the other, some others by PetSmart. To me, the PetSmart acquisition kind of makes sense. There's some synergy there. PetSmart has some idea of how to help manage or at least oversee the running of those practices. A chocolate company to me is a lot more confusing. Why did that happen? What made them interested in acquiring veterinary practices?
In 1996, right, we had veterinary practices in 35 PetSmart stores, right, and we offered 24 vaccination clinics to stores that did not have to have a full service veterinary hospital included. We were getting older, and we decided, right, we put all our money into this project, and maybe it's a good time for us to exit. And we had a contract with PetSmart to build out veterinary hospitals in all of their stores nationwide. And we realized that we weren't going to be around that long, right? And so we needed to figure out how to first satisfy PetSmart, because they had been a wonderful partner to us. And, right, at the same time, how we could exit this business. PetSmart said they would buy our hospitals back from us, which was part of our contract. But they asked me who in the world was going to take over this contract and build out the rest of it. They said, can you help us establish somebody? I met with a doctor in Oregon who was interested in the business, and he turned out to be an absolute genius about business. I mean, this guy just saw things differently than the normal person would.
Yeah.
And he got very interested and excited, and we spent a year together putting together a new business eventually called Banfield. At that time, it was just called PetSmart. I don't even recall the name, but anyway, right, it morphed into Banfield, right? Part of the original mechanism in doing this was that we got together at our corporate offices in Houston with the 4 major manufacturers of pet food in the United States. At that time, it was Hills, Purina, Euthanasia, and Mars. And we had them each in for a half a day to tell us why should we sell their product. And the Mars presentation was absolutely, I mean, they were all fantastic, right? But the Mars presentation just blew me away, right? We were in our conference room. There were 8 or 10 employees from my company. There were a couple from the New Build Oregon company that we were putting together. And Mike Murphy was the president of the pet food division of Mars. And he began his presentation and said that the pet food division of Mars was the largest division of Mars. And it also included, for whatever reason, Uncle Ben's rice is part of the pet food division. Who knows why?
Yeah.
But anyway, all right. I asked him, I said, Mike, are you telling me you sell more pet food than you sell M&Ms? And this was 1996-ish, 95 maybe. He said, last year we sold $750 million, not a million, billion dollars more pedigree than we sold M&Ms worldwide. Well, $750 million back then was a lot of money, you know?
It's still a lot of money now. Maybe not at that corporate level, but it's still a lot of money.
It apparently was chump change to them, right? But the reality is that at that time they had something like 200 different brands of pet foods that they manufactured. Pedigree is only one of them,
right?
And they sold $750 million more of pedigree than they did M&Ms worldwide. So I'll give you some idea why Mars is playing. Mars is not strictly limited to chocolates. Mars is a great believer and has been a great supporter of the veterinary industry, has done a great job. They now own over 1,000 or maybe closer to 1,500 veterinary clinics, and they're bringing a lot of economic power to the veterinary business that wasn't there before. That may well account for the multiples increasing. The multiples on the VCA purchase were about 18 times earnings. That was unheard of.
Yeah. Obviously, that's a boon to the industry. That's a way that the industry has changed for the better. If acquirers have more faith in the business's ability to produce revenue long term, are there any ways that this has changed the industry that are maybe not as good? Like any bad things that this consolidation process has done to the industry?
I don't think that consolidation has hurt this industry. I think it's helped this industry. Right. When I was first introduced into veterinary medicine, it was literally a mom and pop profession.
Yeah.
My mother worked. She was a receptionist in the vet clinic. My dad was a vet. That's the way it was, right? On every corner was a veterinarian. There was no cohesiveness, no ability to take advantage of any economies of scale or any economies of education, right, by utilizing people in management that knew what they were doing. It was just mom and pop. Now it's become a real profession. And that's what led to our association with PetSmart. Right? In 1980, I wrote a business plan, and it said, and we called it our Sears plan, because at that time Sears was consolidating everything it could get its hands on. And right, I said, eventually somebody's going to look at the pet industry, not just the veterinary industry, but the pet industry.
Right.
And they're going to see that on every street corner is a pet shop, and that there's no cohesiveness and no business plan, no business expertise to any of these little small pet shops. Why don't we roll up a few of them? Right. I hadn't envisioned, why don't we start up a few of them, but why don't we roll up a few of them? And when they did that, they were going to very soon realize that the veterinary industry was exactly the same. It had no cohesiveness, right, and was ripe to be rolled up itself. And I said, what we need to do is we need to build a plan, execute our plan, and be the conduit for whoever it is that's going to roll up the veterinary industry to enter into our industry. And we said we had to have the plan completed in 1985. And by 1985, we were ready. In 1986, I began to try and contact PetSmart when they built their first store. And by 1988, we were providing services for PetSmart. In 1992, we started building full-service veterinary hospitals with them.
How has that whole complex changed as adoption and shelters have sort of come farther into certainly the social limelight, as adoption, as there's been a push for adoption from shelters?
Well, it's totally 180 degrees to where it was before. Right. And it's a great 180 degrees. We recognize that we have done a great job in stopping the overpopulation problem that led to all of this to begin with. Right. The irresponsible pet ownership. That was the way we started our first chain of veterinary hospitals, were low-cost spay and neuter hospitals, where we worked with the humane organizations rather than against them. At that time, veterinarians and humane organizations had an adversarial relationship. And I spent 20 years on the board of directors of the Houston Humane Society because I believed that we needed to do something, and that veterinarians certainly had a part in this somewhere.
Sure.
Most veterinarians said it's not our responsibility. I said, no, it's not, right? But we're the only people that have the ability to help. And in addition to that, take it a step further, back in the 1960s, we were talking about that time period, right? I tried to convince the veterinary community that we should do free spays and neuters for the humane organizations, because they were the problem at that time. They were turning out dogs that were totally intact. And they were turning them out to people who had no idea about being responsible pet owners. So they turned loose with a female dog that they would adopt out. And 2 years later, that dog had 40 puppies. Well, that wasn't being humane, because now you had 40 puppies that you had to figure out what to do with. There was no place. So it's become so much better. The problem that I tried to explain to my colleagues at that time was, look, if we don't help these people, right, they're going to help themselves, and they're going to start doing spays and neuters themselves. And that's going to take away from what we do for a living. Right? In addition to that, they're going to recognize that they're a nonprofit and can generate revenue to support their nonprofit by sponsoring spay and neuter clinics, by vaccination clinics, by selling products and providing veterinary services. And so we can keep all of that if we work with them. If we work against them, we're going to lose all of that business, which certainly became true. It was pretty prophetic. I'm thrilled that we don't have to do nearly the number of spays and neuters that we used to. In 5 years in one of my clinics, I did 45,000 of them in the mid-1980s. Right now, I don't think we do 45,000 in 5 years between all of our clinics.
Right.
And that's great, because we're seeing dogs that are already spayed and neutered.
45,000 in 5 years. Is that so? That's 9,000 a year. Is that like 25 a day?
We did 30 a day, 6 days a week.
Oof.
That's how big the demand was back then. We could have done 60 a day, right? But 30 a day took half a day, and the rest of the day we spent doing medicine. Yeah.
All right. Kind of related to what we were talking about earlier, we've unfortunately seen pretty significant suicide rates for veterinarians, and I wonder what this pings in the back of my mind is, I know among doctors, many doctors, and I don't know if this is true for veterinarians, many doctors have a lot of debt despite their high salaries. It's something that you see a lot in the medical field. And I'm wondering if there's this kind of, it strikes me that the doctor life is one of highs and lows. And I don't know how to describe it in words exactly, but it seems to me like they approach their finances possibly from a very emotional place. And when I see high suicide rates for veterinarians, I wonder if there are some of the same factors at work. What factors drive disproportionate suicide rates for veterinarians compared to the general population?
Well, I mean, that's a really, really difficult subject to address because we don't know. Right? We all have our theories, not we, right? The people that are studying this, working on this problem, all have their theories, and most of it's translated or transposed from other high suicide rate groups that say, well, do they have this factor, that factor, the other factor?
Right.
We certainly know that finances play a part of it, but it's interesting to note that the rate of suicide in male veterinarians is 1.6 times higher than the normal population.
Yeah.
Female practitioners is 2.4 times the normal, the rate in the rest of the population. But there's another thing that caught my eye.
Yeah.
It says the suicide rate in veterinary technicians is also higher than in the rest of the population.
Huh.
And that, to me, at least hints at taking away finances as being the primary issue, because the veterinary technicians are mostly OJT or have very little invested in formal education.
Huh.
But working in a veterinary clinic apparently has something to do with the stress. One of, I guess there are 4 or 5 things, right? Long hours.
Yeah.
Well, long hours have been really, really ameliorated by the current methods of practice, right? In your corporate practices, right, the doctors are limited to 40 hours.
Right.
Right. In your private practice, right, they're limited to near that, or else if you make them work 50 hours, and that's your requirement is that they have to work 50 hours, they'll go work at the corporate. Right. So, and that's one of the benefits of the corporate practice, right, for veterinarians is they've changed the workforce habits. So the long hours, right, are not an issue that I see as contributing. Finances certainly contribute, but I don't know that they're the prime contributor. Right? We're caregivers, right? That explains to me why our profession is turning female. Over 60% of all the veterinarians in practice now are female, and over 80% of the students in veterinary colleges are female. And it has to do, I think, with the fact that women are more natural caregivers. I mean, I care, but I cannot care like my mother cared. She knew something genetically that's just different in the DNA. And as caregivers, right, we want to make everything okay. We want our clients to be okay. We want our patients to be okay. We want our staff to be okay. And realistically, that's not the real world. You know, people don't come in to see us because they're okay. They come in to see us because they're not okay.
Yeah.
And they don't always leave okay. Euthanasia is an issue that keeps popping up. Is, well, you have to put 3 or 4 dogs to sleep in a day, or 3 or 4 patients to sleep in a day. You feel like a total failure. That's not what we got into this for. We got into this to make them feel better.
Right.
As you get older, right, your view of euthanasia changes. I think it's the most powerful tool that I've got in my box, right? Because I can put an end to pain and suffering. Right? You know, you see some of these animals just like we see people, right, who would not under normal circumstances still be alive, but we keep them alive through the new technology.
Right.
And they're miserable. Now, are we really doing our job of preventing pain and suffering? No. Right? How can I help them? I can help them. My physician friends can't help their patients.
That's
So,
heavy
right,
stuff.
if you really want to get down to what's going to happen with the suicide, as we investigate, we're going to find out more and more what leads to the suicides. In the meantime, right, there are help groups, peer help groups, right, that are really strong, right, in trying to prevent suicide amongst our veterinary colleagues. And they're great support groups. So in the meantime, we're going to support and try and prevent until we know what causes. At that point, we have to change something that we're doing. I'm really interested to know, is the suicide rate as a percent the same from all veterinary schools? Or are some schools preparing their students for the realities of life better than other schools? You know, is that where we need to look? Do we need to look at how we tell them what they're going to do every day? I don't know. Right? It's going to be very interesting to find out. In the meantime, it saddens me to think that we have a high suicide rate in anything, especially in my profession.
Sure. Yeah, of course. The question I would ask has to do with what you were talking about in terms of therapeutic resources. My guess, and I don't want to presume to know anything in terms of what's going through the mind of a person who chooses to take their own life. I don't want to presume anything there, but I would guess that schools and corporate organizations and any organization that encourages their participants to avail themselves of all available psychological resources would probably do better in that respect. But again, that's just conjecture on my part.
Well, I think the conjecture is really, really well founded and well thought out, Ben. Right? Banfield announced before the end of last year that they're going to have open phone lines to psychologists for the veterinary profession. Right, and that's going to be available not just to their employees, but cost-free to any veterinary employee. And that they're also, right, going to close all of their hospitals for a 2-hour seminar. I suppose it's going to be a webinar sometime, right, after the first of the year. I don't know what COVID's done to it, right? But at some point they're going to close it, and right, everybody's. It's available to everybody to sit in on as well. So you're right. I mean, some of the big groups have the power and the wherewithal to bring that to the industry,
right?
And are being socially responsible by doing so. Right.
I just thought of something. You said a few minutes ago that you feel like that view of euthanasia changes as a veterinarian gains experience, and that you feel like it is the most powerful tool in your kit, so to speak. I think those were your words. And I'm wondering if some of what contributes to the higher suicide rate may be a consequence of coming to understand that that is the most powerful tool in a veterinarian's kit. And then, again, unintended, the veterinarian thinks in the back of their mind, my patients are suffering. This is how I help them. I am suffering. How can I help myself?
Well, right, when you see discussions of suicide in the veterinary industry, right, it's always hand in hand with discussions of our knowledge and ability to access the drugs that can end life, right, either our patients or our own, right? Phenobarbital it's an anesthetic, right, that's administered intravenously, and given in an overdose, it simply stops all the biological activity. So it makes it very, very easy to make that extrapolation that you're making. And that's why I say at some point I think that the educational system is going to have to deal with explaining what is euthanasia. What are you really doing? We technically learn how to do it, right? We, by training, know when it needs to be done, but nobody really explains the good that we're doing with it.
Right.
It's looked at the ultimate failure, the ultimate evil. Right? When you get older, right, you begin to, I think, get it more into the proper perspective. So one of the things that I thought about was, and we need to have some experienced doctors, veterinarians, right, sit in on classes and tell the students, this is what you're going to do every day. Right? I mean, we do that prior to the time they go to vet school. We require them to work in a veterinary hospital so they'll see what it's like, because what they see up front is a bunch of happy people, right, having a good time. What they don't see in the back is all this that you and I are talking about.
Right.
So they don't see the stress, the long hours, the difficult decisions, and we become part of these families. And that makes it even more difficult in that we feel vested in their family. These are friends of ours. We call them the first name. My cell number is on all of my business cards. I want every one of my clients to understand that I am concerned about them. And if they have a problem, call me. That's why I'm here, to try and help them. And so when I have Lucy come in, who I've been taking care of since she was a 6-week-old puppy, and she's now 16 years old, I've got 16 years of experience in personal relationship, right? And so it is difficult, right? But I've come to the conclusion or come to the realization that I've never put an animal to sleep that is not better for being put to sleep. And that's what I'm here for, to relieve pain and suffering.
How do you manage the emotional responsibility of that? We're talking literally life and death. And what do you but you seem like a very happy guy. I would guess that you sleep very well at night. At least from an emotional perspective. Why is that?
Do you know who Herb Kelleher was?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I ran an airline. He ran an airline. And I always thought that Herb, he wasn't afraid to color outside the lines either.
True.
In fact, he invented coloring outside the lines. And there's a saying that's attributed to him. And what he says is, and I don't know that it really was, but this is a saying. There are only two types of people in the world. There are people who are born happy, and there are people who are born innately unhappy. He said, you cannot make a happy person unhappy for a long period of time, nor can you make an unhappy person sustain happiness for a long period of time. At Southwest Airlines, we're only going to hire happy people. And they certainly do that. I mean, they're happy you to death on a dadgum airplane. When I wrote our very first policy manual, operations manual for our veterinary clinic in our business in 1978, the second sentence says, I can teach you to give an injection. I cannot teach you to smile. I have to hire people who know how to smile. And so we're saying the same thing. You know, some people are just happy. You know, I mean, I think it's a blessing for me, right? And so, yeah, you're right. And but the unfortunate part in the pet industry, right, and this is off topic, right, but it's just of interest, I think, is that people who relate to animals closely typically do so because they don't relate to people closely. And their bonds are to animals. And if they never saw another person, right, and could only see animals, they would be happy. Well, that's great. They make great caregivers. They make great technical people. But they don't make a great living because the dog or the cat is not who makes the decision to come to see me or who brings in the revenue. Right? We have to deal, it's a three-part equation. We have to deal with the client as well as deal with our patient.
The client is not the patient. That's the problem. The
client is not, right? And in fact, it's defined in our state statute, right, that governs veterinary medicine. You have to have a valid doctor, client, patient relationship. In other words, not only do I have to know your dog, I've got to know you.
Do you think there's a relationship? So you said people who relate well to animals often don't relate well to people. Is there a relationship between that and introversion, extroversion, or is there something else that influences that thing and I want to, so I'm sorry if this gets complicated, but I want to loop in something else that you said, which is people are inherently happy or unhappy. And I think there's some truth to that. It's not something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, but I think there is something there. So then someone who wants to spend their time around animals, is there any relationship between that and inherent happiness, unhappiness? Because that would speak to the suicide issue as well.
And I think it's very interesting, right? My theory has always been that I want to hire the happiest, most people-loving staff that I can have. Mm-hmm. But we had, at one time when we had the PetSmart clinics all over the country, we had almost 1,000 employees in the company.
Right.
And we recognized at that time that we had the unique ability to accumulate information, not just about pets, because we were seeing so many and they were all going into a unified database, right, but also about employees. And so that there were 4 of us that were partners in that business, and we sat down and said, let's each pick 5 technicians who we think are ideal technicians. And we'll have a psychologist give them a personality test, see what's the basis of these people. And so we each listed 5 people, and I think we came up with a total of maybe 20 people that we decided that we would test. Males, females, young, old, Georgia, Colorado, Texas, New Mexico, right, just as random as we could possibly be. But these 20 people were considered by all of us to be the most capable technicians that we had. And what it found was that, contrary to my thought about them being gregarious, they were almost to a complete number, right, introverted. They loved to do what they do. They love to take care of pets. They wanted to be left alone by people, right, so they could do their job. Right. So what you're talking about, right, may have a lot to be said for it, that it's the basic personality type that relates to animals more than people, right, that has some failings in their ability to carry on, maybe.
How do we address that then? What do we do?
Well, I think, again, right, we've got to identify the problem. And we don't know the problem. You and I have come up with one idea.
Sure.
Right? But, right, that we need to have the data, right, to make the decision. If we don't know what's broken, we don't know how to fix it.
Right. I think that there's some fascinating stuff to be had there. I look forward to seeing, what the results are of this and how the industry moves forward over the next 10, 15, 20 years. I'll be fascinated to hear more about that at a later date.
Yeah, I hope I'm around to hear about
it. You're a hale and hearty guy. I have great faith. You have chased a number of pursuits in your life. You've done a lot of things, from serving in the military, and thank you for serving our country, to owning a helicopter airline with veterinary medicine in between. How have you balanced breadth versus depth, being interested in a lot of things, but leaving a clear legacy?
Well, I saw that reference to leaving, right? And I had not given any consideration to leaving yet, right? So it makes it a little difficult, right? Legacy, right? I think my legacy is going to be in a couple of areas. The first thing is that I did not get more vested in one of my projects than I did in any of the others. I was equally deeply vested in each and every one, right? Business, in my observation, is business. Right? The vocabulary may change between industries or services, but the basics of business are the same. And I applied what I knew, right, from one business to all my other businesses. So I was equally vested in each of the things that I did, right? If we're going to talk about legacy, I think the legacy is going to come in two areas. One, I would hope that this would be the major thing, the overall legacy that comes, is that you can do a ton of things, right? And you can do them well. You can enjoy your life, and you can bring good to the people who work for you and the people that you serve. And it doesn't have to be just in one area. You can do it in multiple areas. So I would hope that the legacy would be that your body is limited, but your mind is not, right? Your body can do 8 hours or 10 hours of something. Your brain can control what gets done by hundreds of people, right, over thousands of hours.
Yeah.
So, right, there's no reason to think that at 18 years old, you made a decision about what you're going to do, and that's going to be the only thing that you're ever going to do. I would hope that would be the major legacy that I leave. The mechanical legacy that I leave is probably more in the area of what did I change in veterinary medicine and the way that it's offered. And if you think back to 1980 when we laid down our Sears plan, that was the beginning of the real corporate veterinary medicine model, that there was going to be a big company that had business expertise, that had the ability to bring financing and capital to the veterinary industry, that would get involved in the veterinary industry, and that it had to get involved through veterinarians, not just through business people. Right? Again, the business is just a business. I mean, we got profits, we got loss, we got inventory, blah, 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 blah. Right? But right, the practice of medicine is what's unique, and so you had to have veterinarians involved in the inception and the conception of this. And I think that would be my primary legacy, was helping to envision and establish that and bring it to the table. There are other things. The very first veterinary emergency clinic in Houston that encompassed veterinary specialists during the daytime, right? My partner and I built that. We conceived of that business and built it. We went to the veterinary community, and we recruited veterinary specialists to staff the hospital during the daytime. Because at nighttime, right, we had emergency staff there. We had a great veterinary hospital. It was central to all the veterinary hospitals in Southwest Houston. And so, right, we thought, well, why not put a bunch of veterinary specialists in here during the daytime? At that time, which was 1972, 73, there were no veterinary specialists in the city of Houston. None. We didn't have a veterinary surgeon. We didn't have a veterinary ophthalmologist, a dermatologist, an eniologist. We had none. And we knew that the technology of our profession was expanding so quickly that it's impossible for a general practitioner to know everything about everything. And so we went out and recruited. We had a veterinary specialist, a internal medicine specialist, a dermatologist, an ophthalmologist. We had a veterinary lab set up there. We had a veterinary radiologist, and I forget what all else we had. Eventually, that group outgrew the facility and joined with another group and became Gulf Coast veterinary specialists, which sets the standard now for veterinary medicine in the world. And so that was part of the legacy, too, was bringing some of the innovations, right? Bringing the multi-sided small corporate veterinary practice, right, to being, right? So I think those are the things that are my legacy. But I would like to be remembered mostly for, you can do anything you want to do, just go do it. You know, I'm sure that I'm not smarter than you are, Ben, right? But I'm equally as sure you're not any smarter or more capable than I am.
Yeah. And
when I looked around at things, I would see people doing things, and I said, well, if they can do that, I can probably do it too. And of course, that may get back to the God complex. You got to be careful with it.
Of all your professional experiences, what has been your proudest moment?
Oh, I think my proudest moment, right, in my professional, as far as business experience, my proudest moment has been the PetSmart, conceiving the PetSmart and making that happen. You know, I mean, it was uncanny how well it happened, and I can remember, right, the first several meetings with the PetSmart the original group were all Harvard MBAs. Most of them were freshly minted Harvard MBAs. Mm-hmm. Which means that that redefined the God complex, which I was able, you know, I'm from Bay City, Texas. I had not one accounting course, not one business course, but I'm making deals with these guys that made a lot of sense to both of us, right, in business. And those were some of my proudest moments, were being able to bring that business to fruition, to offer employment to 1,000 people. You know, I mean, how cool was that? It also had a lot of responsibility with it. Oh, my gosh. I mean, you know, you make a decision when you had yourself and 6 employees, and you'd shoot from the hip. And if you missed, well, heck, you'd reload and fire again until you got it right. A little bit different when you had, you know, 1,000 families depending on you to make the right decision the first time. I had those conversations with the president of PetSmart many times, right? Would say how it changed our ability to make decisions. Right? You know, it became from shoot from the hip to making critical decisions.
Right. Let's move to rapid fire. In a couple of sentences, what do you consider your most valuable failure?
My most valuable failure was unfortunately a sad one. I wasn't able to help my partner in the real estate businesses, the helicopter industry, I wasn't able to help him through some personal problems he was having. It was during a different time, and there were a lot of things that challenged people back then, and ended up having to close the real estate business, right? But, right, that was my most valuable lesson too, and that I learned, right, when I got into the real estate business, how little I knew about business. And that's what stimulated me to say, gosh, I need to find out what I don't know. I don't need to find out how to fix it, but I need to find out where do I get it if I need it. I go to Ben, who knows all about this particular subject. I say, Ben, right, you studied this for 6 years. I only heard the word, right? I need some help with it. Come help me.
And I say, I think you've got the wrong number. No, just kidding. What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you?
I'm sorry? Oh, I think that people have a tendency to think that all of this came by luck, because it seems simple from the outside. I don't think there are maybe a dozen people that understand about for instance, the Sears plan. We wrote that in 1980. We exited that business in 1996. So it was 16 years to bring that to full fruition. Right. And I think most people think, well, golly, lucky guy, it just happened. And it didn't just happen.
Takes 20 years to make an overnight success.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly.
If you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be? I
think I would ask the Dalai Lama to come counsel me on life. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever listened to him. Right. I have no religious affiliation with the Dalai Lama, but there is a man who has genuine inner peace. Right. And not only does he have it, but he wants to share it with anybody that he can. I would love to spend a day with him, just sitting there listening to what he has to say about how do you continue to sleep well at night. Good guy.
What is the most important advice you would give to yourself exactly 5 years ago?
Oh, I like that. I really like that question. Most important advice I would give myself 5 years ago is life begins at 70. Keep going, right? Your brain is just another organ. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it.
What is the book you've given most often as a gift? Or if you're not a book giver, what's the book you've recommended the most?
Oh, gosh, right. It's a book about it had to do with aviation, right? World War II. There's a track runner, right?
Unbroken?
Unbroken, yeah.
Right.
I recommend people read Unbroken. I recommend anybody read anything by Mitchell, right? But Unbroken's the one that I think tells a real good story about perseverance.
Love it. If you could have a billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say?
World, we can do better. Let's do it. Right? There's nothing in this world that we can't do better. And it's always fascinated me, but it's also frustrated me that I can send a letter anywhere in the world, right? Every country in the world agrees on the time, even though I don't know if you know, there are some countries where they have half hours when we're on the hour, like in India or Bangladesh. It may be 10 o'clock here, but it would be 10:30 there, right? They're not exactly standard, but right, in general, right, we can agree on a calendar. We agree on all sorts of things. Why can't we agree to quit killing each other? Why can't we agree on doing things for the environment that are good for us all? Right, it's sort of a frustration to me, and when I was at A&M, I was standing in line to buy tickets for the A&M UT game, right, when Kennedy was killed. And we really believed. We really believed we were making the world better, that we were going to make it a better place for all of us, that we were going to get rid of all this nonsense about, well, your color has something to do with your intellect or your morality, and we lost a lot of that at that time, right? I wish we could get some of that back, right? We certainly don't have it now. Civility toward each other and other things that we should have.
What is your fondest memory in a couple of sentences of Texas A&M?
Boy, it's real difficult because I have jillions of them. I think my fondest memories were of Earl Rudder. Yeah, General Rudder was the president of the school at that time. He'd walk around the campus, right, just like he was one of the students. He was just a regular guy. And my fondest memory of him was when it was time to integrate. Because I don't think most people, certainly not your age, have any concept of what went on. There were riots in all the universities around Texas. I can't say all. In most of the universities around Texas, including UT, right, about we don't want to integrate. Right. And Earl called us all together. Colonel General Rudder called us all together in Guyan Hall. We all fit in this one room and said, gentlemen, we don't make the laws of the land, but we damn sure abide by them. There's not going to be anybody that's going to protest us integrating. We're going to integrate on Wednesday, right? Anybody that doesn't like it or agree with it, certainly welcome to remember that Highway 6 runs both ways. And A&M was integrated. I was very, very proud to be an Aggie at that time.
I bet. Anyone you would like to send some good bull?
Yeah, there are a couple, right. First, right, and I'll try and keep it short as I can. My son, Ronnie, class of 69, who listened to one of the previous podcasts and was so enamored that he called y'all to tell you how much he enjoyed it, which triggered, right, me getting to know you and Shannon and Kyle, and got me on this podcast. Right, he's a great man, a great Aggie, and a great son, and the proud father of my granddaughter, Sarah, class of 2023 in the Mays College of Business. Thanks, Ronnie, and a gigantic good bull to all our first responders who are keeping us safe at great risk to themselves. Thank you, and gig 'em.
Good bull, thanks and gig 'em. And Mike, good bull to you, thanks and gig 'em.
Likewise, Ben, good bill to you too. I really look forward to meeting you sometime, preferably not in your room.
The pleasure will be mine at a different location than this.
Okay, great.
We hope you enjoyed that episode for our MasterCast Top 3 Takeaways. I first wanted to talk about what Dr. Mark said about if vets know as little about business as I know about spaying a dog. I can't even imagine how behind the curve they are. You know, I mean, he used that analogy of you've been to business school, you know a lot about business, you probably don't know anything about spaying a dog, and vets are the opposite. They know as little about business as you know about spaying a dog. I did a presentation in February for the TVMA, which is the Texas Veterinarian Medical Association. And they had me come in because of that issue of vets not knowing a lot about business and wanting to do kind of a short business overview and understanding to help them develop some of those skills. So that was a really interesting experience to learn a little bit about some of the business challenges that the veterinary medicine industry faces right now.
Did you do Q&A for that?
I did. I mean, I did both.
What was the centerpiece of your presentation? Like, what was the thesis you were building around?
Yeah.
If you don't know anything about business, here's the most important thing you should know.
Well, for our second takeaway, I wanted to talk about the multiples and why they might be so big. That would actually answer your question, which I think one of the reasons why the multiples might be so high is because there's some obvious places where vet practices are typically undermanaged or not run well. And so another firm could go in and say, oh, I could do this a lot better. And so I'm going to pay a little bit more. I'm willing to pay a little bit more for it than it looks like I should on the surface. And so going back to your question about the thesis or takeaway, it was really related to the amount of lost revenue that vet practices have each year. So I went to the Med Sciences Library and read every vet medicine business book I could find in prepping for that presentation. But one of the most interesting statistics to me was that in 2013, so it was the latest data I could find, in 2013, the average vet practice throws away almost $100,000 per veterinarian in their practice a year.
Wow.
I know, $100,000 a year per vet in the practice.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of money that they're throwing away. And
Sure is.
there were some businessy places where that made sense, like poor revenue tracking. So just you do so many services in one visit for each patient, and you might not check those off properly. And so you might not bill for those services, right? That's kind of an obvious business internal control aspect of making sure you're charging revenue right.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons this book said that vet practices actually have less revenue than they should, or have this $100,000 of thrown away revenue, was how they described it, is because they undercharge for services. And so that was really interesting to kind of put that thesis out there to the group that I was talking to say, look, this is what the literature says. It says you're giving away services. And as someone who uses a veterinarian, I've seen that. I've seen that I bring my dog in for a checkup and I ask you to clip their nails and you give me the nail clipping for free. I don't need you to give me the nail clipping for free. If I'm so lazy that I don't want to clip my dog's nails, and I am, by the way, so lazy that I don't want to clip my dog's nails, it's like one of my least favorite things to do.
Welcome to the Maze MasterCast.
But if I'm so lazy that I don't want to do that, then I expect to be charged for it. But Mike talked about this too. He talked about kind of that tension of, I love animals as a vet. I want to do everything that I can for those animals. And I have a really big heart. And I don't necessarily understand or care about the business aspect of the practice. And so because I care, I'm going to give these services away. And that was a lot of what they were doing, was giving services away because they thought people either didn't want to pay for them. They basically were apologizing for how much vet services cost, where a doctor would never do that. You know, a medical doctor would never apologize for how much something costs. It just costs that much. And they assumed that people couldn't pay it, that they didn't want to pay it, and they were concerned about the animals. So they would do the services for free as to make sure that the animal had the right level of care, to make sure that the people would come back. You know, it was kind of all out of fear that people didn't value what they were doing. That was the biggest part. Was
And
the
also-
fear that people.
And also, I bet guilt played a part in it too.
In what way?
Well, just you feel bad for charging to do something that you enjoy. You're clipping nails, but you're also spending time with this animal.
Yeah, that's true, which is interesting.
And you're like, if I get joy out of this, then I feel bad for charging people to do something that I already want to do.
Yeah. I don't know that anybody wants to clip my dog's nails, but I'm just kidding. They might. But they like you said, they like being with the animals.
Yeah. I mean, at some level, I don't really understand that mindset. I love animals too. I like dogs, and I'm like the best dog grandparent. I want to hang out with the dogs for like 2 hours and run around with them and get tired, and they get tired, and then I give them back to their parents.
Yeah. I think that's a dog aunt and uncle. That's my job.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have some great vets, as good bull to Dr. Lori Lipsy. She's no longer in College Station area, but we miss her dearly. And she is an incredible vet who has given a lot of herself to us. Ryan experienced some human loss throughout life, and she was a huge part of that. There was a dog involved in the situation, and Dr. Lipsy was, you know, almost like just on that journey. Dr. Mark said, you know, if he has a patient for 16 years, that's 16 years of building a relationship with that animal, and maybe the human, if the vet is comfortable interacting with people. And he mentioned that was a challenge, but that's a really significant relationship in someone's life.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting challenge that people have.
Definitely agree.
For our third takeaway, I wanted to talk about the suicide rate. And specifically, I did not know that the suicide rate was higher for women than it was for men.
Neither did I.
I did not know that it was also high for vet technicians, and so maybe not related to the student loan issue. I have heard that the primary contributor may be euthanasia, that people sign up to care for animals and they end up spending a lot of time putting animals to sleep, even though I do also see that as one of the greatest gifts that I've been able to give the pets that I have. I remember I adopted a dog named Moose. He was 1.5 years when I got him. He had been hit by a car, shot, and I don't even know what else, but I know those things because there was physical evidence of them. And he had all kinds of crazy issues. The A&M vet clinic loved us because he was in there all the time. But I remember when I got him, the day that I got him, I got him on July 3rd. And on July 4th, I was standing with him in this field right next to my house. And I was crying because I didn't know how to take care of a dog. And I was afraid I wasn't going to do it well. And we were watching the fireworks from very afar. And I remember like verbally out loud promising him that I wouldn't let him, like he would have a good life and he would not suffer the way that he had before I got him. And so I was out of town one day and he was aging and not doing great. But I had gone out of town for like a week, and Ryan called me towards the end of the trip and he was like, he's not doing well. When you get home, like, let's talk. And I saw the minute I walked in, I was like, nope, I promised him he would not suffer. Like, it's time. And it was a tough decision. But one of the tips that our vet gave us, which people might find useful, is the rule of threes, and to think about what your pet's 3 favorite things are. And if they can't do those 3 favorite things anymore, then it's time. And that's been really, really helpful for us to have some confidence in knowing that it is time to put them to sleep. And so obviously that is always hard, but it is, for me, it felt like an act of love that I could do that for him, right? Make that decision for him, and that he didn't have to suffer anymore.
Why do you think we're so in on euthanasia for dogs and pets in general and not in on euthanasia for people?
I don't know. I have a hard time wrapping my brain around it, for sure. I am perfectly fine with that for pets. I, in theory, feel like I would want that option for myself as well. And yet, because it's not socially acceptable, I have a really hard time wrapping my brain around it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. And what I'm turning over in my mind right now is, once I can't do my 3 favorite things anymore, what would I want? And the honest answer is, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. Would I want to say, my time has come, strap me in and let's do it painless, and I'm going to say my goodbyes and everybody gets to know this is it. And we don't do things that way, for better or worse. And death, to me, and I've said this before and some may disagree, death is not scary for any number of reasons. Dying is a little scary, but if you knew it was going to be painless, and if you knew you could decide, you could do it on your own terms, I feel like that would give us so much more agency. And, maybe there will be some blowback for us saying this, but I feel like we have not given enough thought to this issue as a society and to the possibility here. And I'm not saying, I think we would need to obviously regulate it out the wazoo. But
there are some states where it is legal.
Yeah.
I think it's so complex. It's so complex.
Yeah.
I think that it feels very
fraught.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to say it. It feels very fraught. And it is, you and I are talking about it as just 2 people, not debating anything political or legal or whatever.
Right.
I'm glad I'm not in that position because I think it is so fraught. But it's interesting, and thinking about, like you said, what would I want? I have no idea. I think it also depends on what end of life is like for people. You know, I mean, there's different experiences. There are just different ways of dying. But for me, I definitely think aging in general is scary to me, and that quality of life deterioration that no matter who you are, you're going to experience. I think that death is kind of the great equalizer, right? That we all are going to experience this really challenging, almost undignified aspect of life. There's a great Jason Isbell song called Elephant, and he's talking about his friend is dying of cancer.
Yeah.
And it's just a beautiful song. And he talks about how she's surrounded by all these people, but she's dying alone, basically, as everyone else does, and kind of the lack of dignity that happens in death. And it's very, very tough. I don't pretend to have any answers to that, but I think what you point out is really interesting, that we are comfortable with animals, not comfortable with people. And what does that mean?
Right. I think at some level we all die alone.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. It's a singular act.
Yeah. And I know that most people don't like to think about death, and I'm probably more comfortable with thinking about it than most. I think about it.
Let's keep talking about it then.
Yeah. I mean, it's something, thinking about how to do that well is something that I spend some time with. And maybe that makes people uncomfortable. And as much as I love our listeners, I don't care because this is important.
Sorry, listeners.
Yeah.
We do love you.
Yeah, we do love you.
No, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Something we will all experience and have varying degrees of comfort talking about.
Yeah, true.
All right. Well, those were my top 3 takeaways.
I can close us with a quote.
Close us with a quote.
Not being tense, but ready. Not thinking, but not dreaming. Not being set, but flexible. Liberation from the uneasy sense of confinement. It is being wholly and quietly alive, aware and alert, ready for whatever may come. This is the higher being. Bruce Lee. More Bruce Lee.
We're just going to keep that going.
Yeah.
How long can we have Bruce Lee quotes?
Well, next week I'll do quotes from the jerk Bruce Lee in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he talked about Cassius Clay. I would make him a cripple.
That's good. Yeah, because he sounds so wise in that. But we know because we've seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
I still think we talked about this a week or two ago. I still think it's both. Bruce Lee, a wise man who spent a lot of time pontificating.
About himself.
Yes, largely about himself, indeed.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
An MBA from Texas A&M University can take your career to a whole new level. With full-time and weekend options, Texas A&M suits your schedule. So get a better gig. Visit mba.tamu.edu.